Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And welcome back to another episode of accidentalmuslims.com. Today I've got the great honor of sitting with one of the 500 most influential Muslims in the world, according to the Muslim 500, which is a think tank in Jordan. And that is none other than Shaykh Dr. Muhammad bin Yahya al-Ninowy. He's no stranger to our shores, and nonetheless I thought it would be apt for me to just give a short introduction for those of us who may not be familiar with his work, and this comes from the Muslim 500 think tank. Shaykh Dr. Muhammad al-Ninowy is a Syrian-American scholar and author based in Atlanta, Georgia, whose lineage is traced back to the Prophet Muhammad, blessings and peace be upon him. Al-Ninowy is considered a muhaddith. In addition to holding a PhD in hadith science, he also holds a bachelor's degree in microbiology from the University of Illinois and a doctorate of medicine degree. He's the founding director of Medina Institute and Seminaries, the Center for Non-Violence and Peace Studies, and the charitable organization Planet Mercy, which have operational activities worldwide. Medina Institute and Seminary is a groundbreaking initiative offering traditional Islamic theological education in a modern setting and is geared towards producing homegrown leaders, thinkers, and scholars. He has been the forerunner in promoting non-violence amongst all people and religions worldwide. Al-Ninowy is also the spiritual guide of the Alawi Husseini Ninowy Zawiya, a Shadili Rifai Sufi order. So Shaykh Ninowy, in your own words, who is Shaykh Ninowy?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Rasulullah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa ala. Thank you first of all for sitting with me and having this conversation. May Allah Ta'ala bless you and what you do. Muhammad al-Ninowy, Muhammad bin Yahya al-Ninowy, to me is a human being, a student and a seeker, researcher, strives to seek knowledge, wisdom and simplicity, prioritizes the book and the sunnah, believes that spirituality is an inseparable aspect of our deen, ihsan, not just ritualistic iman or Islam or theological iman only, believes in unconditional compassion towards all, malice towards none. Maybe that's enough self-praise, I guess.
Subhanallah. Unconditional compassion towards all,
malice towards none.
Subhanallah. Very, very profound. I think we could elaborate on every one of those points further. Subhanallah. So tell us about your youth. And what inspired you? You've given a few adjectives of who you are. What inspired you to take that path, to take the path of Islamic scholarship, researching, pursuing knowledge?
Well, first of all, I have to all credit go to Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, the facilitator of all. But also, like the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said in Sahih Muslim, "Man la yashkuru an-nas la yashkuru Allah." Those who are not thankful to people are ungrateful to Allah. And one ought to be thankful to my teachers. Where I was raised and as I grew up, those teachers of mine, may Allah Ta'ala reward them with the highest levels of Jannah, were not perfect people. But they were people who have had love for the deen and zeal for the Quran and the Sunnah, and they've instilled that in us in many ways, and I will treasure that and treasure their memories until the day I die. And they've informed us and taught us in many ways that one may do many things in life, but the direction that we're all going towards the Creator at the end of the day should never be lost. That this is a temporary dimension and we're going to the next dimension that's everlasting. That should never be away out of your vision or objectives. So I think that's what put, and they've brought many examples of Imam Shafi'i himself, born 150 of Hijrah, almost 1300 years ago, being a physician himself and a scholar, and Imam Ibn Hibban, one of the greatest hadith scholars ever in the 4th century, also being a physician and a scholar. Imam Abu Hanifa himself, rahimahullah, born year 80 or 90 of Hijrah, himself being involved in business and a scholar. So they told us that it should never be either or, and I think eventually my passion took over my career. So I'm where I love.
I just want to touch on two things that you've mentioned. So I think one thing that I found very profound was your acknowledgement to your teachers, and you mentioned that you will cherish those memories. Could you perhaps name one or two of the teachers that you had that had a very profound impact, and perhaps maybe share one or two of those stories with us?
Allah blessed me with many teachers, but as early as my own father, rahimahullah, was my first teacher. My uncle, Sayyid Saeed, rahimahullah, was also my teacher. And other people put me in an environment of always academic debate, and where the clash of minds was happening almost every day, but the clash of hearts was not. So being in a place where scholars come junior and senior, and you see clashes of mind happening all the time, and yet you see unity at the hearts, that gave me an understanding that this deen is a great deen. And obviously you're traumatized as you grow to be an adult, and you see a reductionist attitude towards the deen, to reduce this deen into a dogma, or to a one way or the highway, or this is the sunnah, anything else is a bid'ah, and if you don't follow, I'm going to terrorize you, or if you don't do I call these intellectual terrorism and reductionism. So I thought it's important to go back to basics, and the basics of the more you know, the less you object, and the less you know, the more you object. And to go to the Prophet ﷺ sunnah, which was the authentic sunnah, that is, which is vast, accepting, tolerant, forgiving, loving, redeeming, and to go back to the very foundation He placed for us: Islam, Iman, and Ihsan, not just Islam, so that we don't dwarf the deen into a list of do's and a list of don'ts, and we make it deen. We don't ritualize deen and make it only a set of rituals, but it actually is a journey of transformation from ritual to spiritual, from information to transformation, so or to realization even, ma'rifah rather than ma'lumat, which people confuse with ilm, and therefore I think all these things shape one's vision, and my teachers, many of them, and I'm afraid to mention one and forget the other, and they're all significant, and they've all had the greatest things. Amongst the most beautiful thing Allah Ta'ala granted me, and of many people, is that which Allah Ta'ala said in the Quran: وَمَن يُضْلِلْ فَلَن تَجِدَ لَهُ وَلِيًّا مُرْشِدًا في Surah Al-Kahf. And the counter positive meaning of that verse, which means whom Allah guides, you will find people who guide him the way. He will facilitate for him or her to be guided. And I think that's one of the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So may Allah ta'ala grant all my teachers the highest levels of Jannah, forgive all of their sins, and their shoes will always remain the shining crown on my head.
I just want to touch on one point that you mentioned in your explanation, where you gave the examples of Imam Shafi'i and Abu Hanifa, people that were physicians, business people, but they were scholars. Where do you think that we find ourselves today, where this has not become a norm, and almost in a sense that we've split knowledge? When we grow up, we often say, okay, well, now that you finish school, you're either going to go to a Darul Uloom and you become a Maulana, and that's your path, or you go and you become a professional in accounting or whatever the field may be. So what do you think is the cause for this, and how do we address it so that we're able to have more people that just see knowledge as knowledge and have that combination?
Well, I think it began a few hundred years back, where we started, so it's not just yesterday, it's a few hundred years where we've separated knowledge into either dini or not dini, versus the prophetic wording, ilman nafi'a, beneficial or non-beneficial. So when we separated dini versus not dini, then we've sort of automatically figured that non-dini knowledge is not beneficial, that's where the confounding took place. And then when the deen becomes then a profession, it becomes difficult, because when it becomes a career, it becomes difficult, because you're set by career standards and career expectations. And the deen was always, in my view, something that you have to have such passion for to be able to give for free. I don't mean for free meaning you live from air. It's not what I'm saying. To give for free meaning free soul giving. I think we're in an age today where we've reduced now. In the old days, as you know, a scholar did not mean someone who went to school for 10 or 12 or 15 years. That did not make someone a scholar. Or Shaykh Said Hawa rahimahullah used to say that it takes 30 years to make a faqih. And I will say maybe it takes about 30 years and about $3 million in Western world investments to make a scholar. And the reason for that is because we just need to have appreciation of our fields, but we don't anymore. Meaning, today there's a mass confusion between scholars, preachers, students of knowledge, researchers, beginner students, public speakers, orators, passionate people, activists, wannabes, and they're all lumped up in this issue. And today, since our focus is based on public speaking skills and charisma, that's really what's considered scholarship, and that's a problem, I think. So I think we need to go back to the basics, obviously, of sure we need a place for students and activists and speakers and public orators and preachers, and also we need places for researchers and students and scholars. But I think that sort of living in an age where a punchline is what matters, and snippets and 1 minute explanation of something, simplification of something, a marketing approach, an evangelical approach to the deen, to Islam, a marketing approach to Islam, a packaging approach. Package is what matters, market is what matters, not content as much. I think that's what's making us suffer, and therefore we're not studying our deen properly, because the deen is about content of information, context, application, and then innovation. I don't mean by innovation here bid'ah. I mean the dynamic application of the contextual knowledge. But I think when the content is missing, we don't have the content there, the context is going to be out. And as you know, a text out of context is a pretext, and that's what it's a bit of a mess.
So I'm glad you touched on all of those points, because I think that leads us now into the Medina Institute, because this year you guys have launched your accredited degree program, and I was privileged to be at that launch at Masjid al-Quds, and you've announced some scholarships as well for that institute. So tell us more about the Medina Initiative, and what is your vision and mission with the Medina Institute?
So the Medina Institute came as an idea that I've had for reviving Islamic studies or knowledge. I thought that what we're doing is, and I will not hide that from you. I first finished Islamic studies in what people call Islamic Studies University degree, and I went to the United States as such. But then I had I was always a free thinker in a sense, so I had little issues with the committee in the community where I was working. And my teacher, one of my teachers, Allah have mercy on his soul, said, you know what, why don't you leave what you're doing now and go do something, work, and then do this on your own as a passion and hobby. And then when I went to study microbiology, and then I went to a medical school to study medicine, I realized that what we've been doing in Islamic studies has been substandard as far as depth and breadth of material, where we've reduced So we have different categories. We have علوم القرآن, علوم السنة, علوم العقائد, and al-fiqh, to say the least. Then we have علم الأصول, and then the Arabic language. So we have about 5-6 different sciences, and today what we've reduced knowledge to is pretty much jurisprudence, fiqh, what you should do and what you should not do. And not only the fiqh, meaning within the comparative schools, no, within the school, and not within the school only, within a subset of the school, because within the Hanafi school or the Shafi'i school or so, there are also different schools, but we've reduced that even to one subset, and we've become so cocooned in a sense on this and intolerant towards even within the same school. So I thought, let me go back to the Usul Foundation. So that's why we've made it a degree in Usul Din, and the accreditation we've got from, alhamdulillah, from the Department of Higher Education is bachelor's degree in Usul Din, or Usul is a plural of Asl, which means the foundation of the Deen. Because while there's many people who know the list of do's and list of don'ts, what you should do in your worship, what you should not do, but I think what we're lacking is the Meccan phase, more than the details of the Medinan phase. And that means, why am I Muslim? Who is Allah Ta'ala? Why is He worthy of worship? Why nothing else is worthy of worship but Him? How do I get close to Him? Why do Sunnis and Shias hate and kill each other? Why are there, not all of them obviously, but why is there hate between Muslim groups, from the radical Sufis to radical Salafis and everything in between? Why is there takfir? Why is there intellectual terrorism between groups? What I mean by intellectual is dismissing of the other as non-existent, not just not valid or not just wrong, but as evil intended. Even going to intentions that these people are out there because they hate the Sunnah on all sides. And I'm not making any exemption for anyone except those whom Allah Ta'ala granted mercy, because there's the good, the bad, and ugly in every group and in every segment of humans, of the human fabric, not just our faith. So, and I figured we need to go back to foundation, and the foundation is very basic. Back to basics, that was the call of Medina Institute, and Medina was back to basics, and that is the Quran and the authentic prophetic Sunnah. And I'm going to put under authentic many things, because what we've managed to do, many of us, it's not, I always say, it's not the religion that is problematic, it's the religious that make it sometimes as such. So I thought the foundation we must go back to the foundational sciences, and we look at the book and Sunnah as sufficient, the authentic prophetic Sunnah, I apologize again, without any censoring, without anyone saying they can only be valid with my understanding or my teacher's understanding. If you don't take my lineup understanding, then you're no good, and that effectively means the Quran and Sunnah are no good except with my view and my eyes. And I thought that the Medina concept was the Quran and Sunnah are good enough on their own. And that doesn't mean we dismiss scholarship, exactly the opposite. The scholars are the stars in our skies. I mean the scholars, not necessarily preachers or students or so. The scholars, Abu Hanifa, Shafi'i, Malik, Ahmad, Sufyaan, al-Bukhari, Muslim, al-Tirmidhi, al-Nasa'i, Ibn Hibban, Abu Dawood, right? Al-Daraqutni, these kinds of scholars. And what we should do, the idea was at Medina Institute, is that the opinions of the scholars are not the deen. The deen is the book and the authentic prophetic Sunnah. The opinions of the scholars are istinas, elucidating on the deen, not substantiating the deen. And those are qualified people, those are big stars. So I think when we look at that's basically the premise of Medina Institute. I'm not going to claim that it is perfect or it has reached the vision or the potential that I think it should, but we're working, alhamdulillah. So, but the point is that back to basics. At Medina Institute, we don't teach dogma, we don't indoctrinate, we empower. Meaning, here's what the Quran says, here's what the Sunnah says, and here are the different opinion of the scholars on this issue within Ahl Sunnah. And we don't force the student to adopt one versus the other. We explain them as they are, and the student chooses.
In terms of accessing Medina Institute, when I was at the launch, it was mentioned that there are scholarships available. Are those still available for people to apply to for next year?
Yes, I think finances or lack thereof should never be barrier from knowledge, and the Medina team is committed to go out and ensure that those who don't have the means, the financial means, have the logistical means or the means to study. So definitely, if you have the aptitude, altitude and attitude, and you really have passion about studying this deen, I would love to invite you to Medina Institute to study, and we will make sure that you study if you don't have the means.
And what would you say to parents who, you mentioned, I think in one of your talks that we live in we've got a limited intellectual thinking, and our aim is materialism, something along those lines, if I recall. And so many people are concerned about their material well-being. They want their children to get into careers and so forth, the usual lot, because they want their children to make money so they get married and so forth. So what would your response be to people who say or to change them to think, well, hang on a second, yes, you can actually study the deen, and after studying deen you can still go into professional studies, or you can pave a way and still sustain yourself while still pursuing Islamic knowledge?
Absolutely, because we live in a world, like I said, it's no longer where am I putting my hand in the prayer, above the navel like the Shafis, or below the navel like the Hanafis, and which one is more authentic. We're at a level where, as I have been saying for the past 20 years, that the Muslim Ummah will be facing mass slides of atheism internally, or the shift from religious to none, and then eventually to anti-religious atheism, just like what happened to our Christian and Jewish brothers and sisters in humanity in Europe in the 1600s on. I don't think we're different in the sense of human growth. So what happened in Europe in the 1600s is repeating itself. So sure, as a parent, I worry about my children's dunya future. But I mean, as a person of faith, what worth is if I have the whole dunya and I am faithless?
Ya Allah.
So a good, healthy combination. The 1-year program that Medina Institute offers, or even the 3-year program, the accredited program that the Medina Institute offers, is not necessary. I don't think, like I said, it should not be one or either or. You can do the 1 year, or you can do even the 3 years, and then go on and do what you want to do in the secular world, if there's such a thing. I think beneficial world rather than secular, yeah. And do good. But if you come out, the problem is, since we've reduced our religion to emotions and outward things that we do, whether it's looks, whether it's associations, I'm associated with this group, so that means I'm good and I'm safe. So we've reduced orthopraxy to orthodoxy only, and we've separated between both. And we've almost informed people that orthodoxy automatically exonerates you from orthopraxy. You don't have to do the right thing. You just have to belong to the right group, or to believe theoretically the right thing. So long you theoretically adopt the right thing, don't worry about orthopraxy. And that's similar to other faith systems out there. So long you accept so-and-so, you're good to go. And I think the problem now is even that orthodoxy is in question. No more the orthopraxy, the very orthodoxy is in question, and the deen became now dwarfed into a set of emotional things, where just have some emotional attachment to it, and in many young people's mind, it doesn't make sense to me, but my parents are like this, and my grandparents like this, and they can't all be wrong, and you know what, at the end I'm just going to follow them. But these guys, and Islam was never meant to be a religion of taqleed, of blind imitation. Islam was always a religion of personal conviction. It's that conviction of Bilal. radiallahu anhu that made him say ahadun ahad despite the severe torture. It's the conviction of Ammar bin Yasir and his family that he watched his own father and mother being killed and they would refuse to even budge. It's conviction that's above any doubt and beyond any uncertainty. That's why the program of Usuluddin at Medina Institute is vital, because we want to go back to the usul, or to the asl, which is the foundation. I'm not saying that fiqh is not important, how to pray or how to worship, but right now I'm at who to worship. We'll talk about how to worship later.
I think I would add a point as well for prospective parents or prospective students. I think one of the amazing things about what you've done in the Medina Institute, because you've got that accreditation, you have an opportunity to actually study the deen and come out with an accredited degree, which you then can take to other institutes, and they will recognize that, and you can actually fast track your professional studies, if we use that word, your beneficial professional studies. So I think that's an important point to note, and that's what I really like about the institute and other institutes that are doing that type of accreditation.
Absolutely.
So I think one of the goals of the Medina Institute is to produce leaders. What are your thoughts of mentorship in this process?
Look, education is a labor of love, first of all. So it's costly. It takes a lot of time, and the results come very late. You don't see them, they're not immediate. But that's what the Prophet ﷺ did. If you remember, in Mecca, the Prophet ﷺ stayed 13 years in Mecca, and in those 13 years, he built people. That's education. When he moved to Medina, the people who built the masjid and built the ummah. But first was the education, because and unfortunately our community, a lot of them understand, but some still don't understand that education is not just the Prophet's primary mission, all the Prophet's primary missions. It's the costliest, most enduring, most difficult, and it takes people who understand the expense of education, and education is expensive. But I always say, ignorance is much more expensive.
SubhanAllah, education is expensive, ignorance is much more expensive. I think that's very profound. And then we can move on, which did happen under the Medina banner, but you've introduced the Book of Love this year. I was very fortunate as well to get a copy and get a signed copy, and to actually sit in some of the classes where you've taught this book. And just for the viewers, this is a book of aphorisms which the Shaykh then expounds on, and SubhanAllah, every time I just sat in that lesson, I was really just taken by how deep this deen goes, and how much nuances are there, and a statement will just appear just to be a simple 2 sentences, but it's got so much depth. So tell us a bit more about the Book of Love and what you aim to accomplish.
So the Book of Love is a summary of my, let's say, 35 years studying with my teachers. Every now and then through their tarbiyah, one thing remains, so I wrote a note on the side of the book. And then some of the students, Allah bless them, that studied with me lately, they said, why don't you collect your notes that you thought that made sense or were important? So I collected those notes, and I put them in this Book of Love. And to me, it is Islam as I see it. So if I want to tell you what is Islam, and if you don't know what Islam is from the book and the Sunnah, and you want to get it from a layman's language, the Book of Love is Islam as I see it, because it's all from love, about love, for love, to love, with love, and that's what Islam is all about. If once you take love out of anything in Islam, it's going to collapse. So, and sometimes again in the ritualistic world that we've had such a massive drive in the past 40, 50 years to ritualize. We've suffered that sort of lot of deprivation from that. So I want to go back to basics again and put Islam as I know it. And you know what? Just tell our story. This is our story. If you want to tell me what is Islam, I'll tell you Islam is love. This is the Book of Love. This is what I understand about Islam. I don't know what you're talking about other than that.
What would you say is your favorite Quranic verse and or hadith and or Islamic story?
I mean, favorite makes it seem that they're less favorite. So there isn't anything less favorite for me from the Quran of Allah Ta'ala and the Sunnah, the authentic prophetic Sunnah of Sayyidina Rasulullah Sallallahu Ta'ala Wasallam, because the book is of Allah Ta'ala, is from the all-loving Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, and the Sunnah is by the beloved and the loving messenger whom he sent with love, by love, to teach love, with love, for love. So but there are many verses that stick out in my mind, obviously, and one of them is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, Ya ayyuhan nas, inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha, wa ja'alnakum shu'uban wa qabaila lita'arafu, inna akramakum inda Allahi atqakum. O humankind, we've created you all and made you into males and females, and made you into tribes and nations, so that you can get to know. You can get to know each other. He didn't say so you can get to fight each other. He didn't say so you can get to hate each other. He didn't say so you can get to be superior over each other. He didn't say so you can get to think that you're better than each other, but to build bridges with each other. All people, ya ayyuhan nas. And that doesn't make a male better than female or a female better than male. Dhakar wa untha. We made you into males and females. And we made you into ethnicities and tribes and nations. And that tells me, like the Prophet ﷺ's hadith in which Al-Hakim authenticated, which means you may be different colors, different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different languages, but at the end of the day, you're all one people. Humanity. And then Allah seals the ayah by telling us, Inna akramakum inda Allahi atqakum. The most honorable of you, all people, to Allah, are those who have highest, best taqwa. And taqwa to me means positive contribution to self and others. That's what taqwa is. Taqwa is not fear. Taqwa is positive contribution. Piety, if you want to translate it like this, and I don't know if you can, but in akramakum inna atqakum, the most honorable amongst you to Allah Ta'ala are those who positively contribute most to self and others. And there you go, the field is open. So I think that's the notion.
SubhanAllah. So I think you mentioned quite a few times the term intellectual terrorism. I'm sure that you might have experienced some of that yourself, and on your trips to South Africa and the subsequent establishment of the Medina Institute, I'm sure you'd have faced your fair deals of criticism along the way, or intellectual terrorism. What is your response to those people who attack what you do and attack your work?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I don't think I'm worth mentioning in that. I don't think that's even, to be honest with you, fair. First of all, criticism is an important part of any organization, any growth. And I'd like to separate between constructive criticism and destructive criticism. And constructive criticism must be absolutely solicited, not just welcomed. Destructive criticism happens by many people. Why? Well, love deprived. So that doesn't stop us. I don't think someone like me should even speak, because how can I measure to the prophets of Allah Ta'ala? I mean, not all people agreed that Isa himself, the prophet of Allah, was the best man on earth in his time, and that his message was the right message. And not all people agreed on Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and not all people agreed even on Ibrahim, the father of all Anbiya. They tried to kill him so many times and call. So I don't think I should even get there. I think that's expiation of, I hope, astaghfirullah, I hope it's expiation of some of my sins, and if it's right, if it's constructive, I always welcome it. If it's destructive, I ask Allah Ta'ala to guide the people, forgive them. It's part of the process. We can't look at these things. That's negligible. And what's happening today is nothing compared to what happened to the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhu. I mean, how can we even mention that? I can't even say that. I remember the hadith Sahih Muslim, you probably remember hadith, or Bukhari, now my memory doesn't serve me, but is one of either. Hadith Sayyidina Khabbab ibn al-Arat, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, one of the early Sahaba, radiyallahu alayhim ajma'in. When he came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Mecca, the early days, he was maybe the fourth person to be Muslim. And he tells the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was leaning on the Kaaba in the shade, he says, Ya Rasulullah, ala tastansiru lana, ala tad'u lana. Ya Rasulullah, why don't you make dua for us and ask Allah for victory for us? Don't you see what's happening to us? My meaning? And the Prophet ﷺ sat up, as in the authentic hadith, and tells him, Ya Khabbab, there used to be the nations before you, they would bring a man and put a chainsaw from top of his head, splitting his head in two so he changes. And he doesn't change. And you want everything, لكنكم تستعجلون, you rush to the results. If Allah Ta'ala uses us in establishing houses of His, places where His name is glorified, rather than everything else but His name is glorified, places where we can remind people with Him, rather than establishing places where we remind people with all kinds of figures and organizations and peoples and missions other than His, I think that's a great thing, and that's a purpose to live for and continue living for.
I think it was a very comprehensive answer, and I think we're going to touch on that topic, not that on depth. We open up the floor for the audience of accidentalmuslims.com to ask their questions, and I think a lot of people took this opportunity and have asked some very meaningful questions. So these are questions from some of our followers. So the first one is, being in a corporate environment, I've been finding it very difficult to work at 8 till 5, and then also to still keep up with trying to get an Islamic education, and also trying to incorporate what I know in the field I'm in to contribute to Islam. Are there any tips or practical advice that you have for people who have full-time jobs and are also trying to create a balance with regards to the above?
Yeah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Look, not everybody needs to be a scholar to start with. That's one. Number two, information does not mean closeness to Allah. Amassing information doesn't mean you're automatically close to Allah Ta'ala. No. Information is like a catalyst. And those of you who have taken chemistry know that. And a catalyst, what it does, it's not involved in the reaction, it speeds it up or slows it down. So ilm, in the sense of information, only eases your way if you want to do so, or makes it slower. That's all. So, first of all, just acquiring information, that should not be necessarily an objective. Knowing the basic information is. Beyond that, practice what you know. You have enough. Practice what you know. Yani we all heard the Prophet ﷺ's hadith في صحيح البخاري عن أبي هريرة رضي الله تعالى عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من كان يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر فليقل خيرا أو ليصمت. Whoever believes in Allah on the day of judgment should have, if he has something good to say, say it. If you have nothing good to say, don't say anything. We already know that. What are we waiting for? Okay. Another hadith by also Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu says, one of you would not be a believer until you love for each other what you love for yourself. The point is not amassing that info. The point is actually putting it into bringing the information into a realization through a process of transformation. This is what deen is. All right. Otherwise, it becomes philosophy, not deen. And the difference is philosophy talks about religion. Deen experiences faith. And today we became philosophers, even in our masajid and centers, because we talk about the religion 24/7. There are many people who talk about God. Few talk to Him. Allah. So we need to move from philosophy, even though they don't call it that way, but it is, descriptively speaking, to now, you know, all right, so you're busy. Good for you. Allah bless you. Allah Ta'ala, may Allah reward you for being a good IT person, a good manager, a good worker, a good taxi driver, a good doctor, a good engineer, a good accountant. If you do a good job, may Allah Ta'ala reward you, and that's a source of good and barakah in your life. acquire basic knowledge, practice it. The more you practice, the better you are, and you need to take some time off also for yourself, meaning other than, because information comes to your mind, but I need you to go, all right, so you practice that, great, but I need you to take also some time for your heart. And that, I'll give you you have some of the, what do you have here in South Africa, a free number, a toll-free number? You have something like that?
Yes.
If you want to dial a big company, you dial a...
Correct, and there won't be a charge for that, yes.
They will be in charge. So I will give all your listeners a nice number to call. And that should be done at least whenever they have needs, whenever they have issues, whenever they feel spiritual drought. It's number 222. 3 2s. They dial that and 222. And that number goes from anywhere in the world. You don't need, even without a phone. It's 2 a.m., 2 rak'ah, and 2 tears. They stand at 2 a.m., they pray at least 2 rak'ah, and in those 2 rak'ah they drop at least 2 tears. There is no hadith or Quranic ayah in that. But that number answers. And I think that's important. You can acquire all the knowledge you want. If that knowledge does not humble you to stand before Allah Ta'ala alone, one-on-one, and collect your whole self at the end of the night onto His presence, and ask Him and plead to Him and beg Him and weep and cry your heart out before Him and submit and surrender to Him, you're living a ritualistic deen. You're living an amassing information kind of deen. So, yeah.
Subhanallah. 222. So I think that's an easy number for people.
I think you can memorize it. There's no charge.
And there's no charge. I think that's a bonus. So I think the next question we sort of touched on the question, one question back or 2 questions back, and in this person wanted to know how do you react to negativity and deal with it.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I think we've talked about that. You have to separate first criticism from constructive or destructive. If it's destructive, you just gotta let it go, because there are bigger people than you who have been criticized destructively. I mean, they were killed. If you take the hadith of Al-Bayhaqi to be authentic, which is not, but it's the best evidence we have, we had 124,000 prophets. The vast majority of those prophets whom Allah Ta'ala Himself commissioned were slaughtered and killed and tortured by the very people they were sent to help. So let's not glorify our struggle. Our struggle is minuscule compared to the struggles of the prophets. Minuscule. And our sacrifices, forget the suffering, because today the metropolitan youth in most Western countries, even in the Eastern, don't know the meaning of sacrifice or sharing. What do you mean I have to? What do you mean I have to share? They don't understand the concepts of wafa, faithfulness to the principles. What do you mean? Well, I don't feel like it now. I mean, the concept of servitude, khidmah, for Allah's sake. The concept of ithar, favoring others over you when you are in dire need. Selfless contribution, not selfish contribution. Everybody does that selfish, but selfless contribution. Those concepts are gone. In the name of the deen, because the deen, even the very religion, we've personified it so much, we've reduced it to figures rather than facts, currents and organizations rather than deen. So I think it's important to first of all take out the negative, and look at the constructive. All right, constructive criticism, you gotta learn from it. You gotta man up to it and learn from it, and that's part of the deal. That's part of growth, and I think it's very important to actually even solicit that. Not only accept it, but you need to solicit it, and that feedback is key to growth before Allah Ta'ala, because you don't see in yourself what others may see, and that's why Allah Ta'ala ordered us in the Quran, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu ittaqullaha wa kunu ma'as sadiqin. Have taqwa of Allah and be with those who are transparent. Why transparent? Because they reflect you. They tell you, all right, you know what? It's coming from a place of love. What you're doing, son, is wrong. And you're not going to get away with it. Because if you think you're going to get away with wrong, your problem is not getting away with evil things. Your problem is thinking Allah is not just or present. And He is. So, why do people get affected by negativity? Because they feel their perception matters to people. If they don't, I'm not saying you should not care about people. You should absolutely care about people. But their perception of you is not what you should care about. You should care about them, not about their perception of you. You gotta check yourself with the Quran and the authentic prophetic Sunnah. That's where your loyalty comes. That's if you understand. Now, if the Quran and the prophetic Sunnah, that's the muhkam. What if it's mutashabih? What if there are multiple views to the same ayah or to the same hadith? Meaning, one hadith may mean two things. One ayah may mean two things. That's where you have to stand back and allow the academics to be involved and not accept one versus the other, even if you practice one versus the other, since it's not muhkam, since it's not sealed. All right? So that's sort of where you say, okay, well, Bismillah. So I think if you check yourself to the Quran and the Sunnah as a standard and you seek to please Allah Ta'ala, not anybody else, you don't worry about anybody else's perception. It doesn't mean you neglect them or you put them down or you say, oh, who cares about you? No. You love them. You give them love. But their perception of you is not what determines your salvation.
So worry about people, not their perception.
Absolutely, because the only time people get hurt by other people's statements is if they care so much about what they think of them. Give me a break, Shaykh. Give me a break. I mean, you want me to tell you the story of Luqman? Do we have time?
Yeah. Well, if we hold that thought and maybe we finish the other
right.
two questions, and then if we have time, I'll note that we can come back to the story of Luqman. Okay, so the next question somebody wanted to know was, how do we deal with differences in the ummah, especially between the scholars?
Scholars themselves, and here, again, with all due respect, I'm going to take a bit of a conservative approach to scholarship. I don't view somebody who studies bits and pieces of everything as a scholar. I don't view somebody who studies bits and pieces of everything for 15, 20 years as a scholar. Unless he's a genius. It takes about 30 years in one specific field to be a scholar in the field. You're a student, yes. I'm a student. I've been studying these sciences for 35 years. I'm not a scholar. I'm not telling you I'm not a scholar because I'm trying to be modest. Allah is my witness, I'm not a scholar. I'm not a scholar in the sense that I can tell you I am an authority or a master of a discipline entirely. I would be lying to you if I tell you that. Sure, I'm a student of knowledge, know bits and pieces of some sciences, and I know maybe a little bit more in one or two disciplines. At a scholarship level, meaning comprehensive, istiqra'i, authority, mastership? No. I used to hire for the university where I work, meaning in the medical field. I would hire teachers also to teach the students. Some students were undergraduate. Obviously, we even had graduate students. And they would come to me, let's say, with a PhD in medical physiology. And that's human medical physiology, human physiology. So that means he's done a bachelor's and a master's and a PhD in the same line. He did not come from business administration and did a PhD in human physiology. And that means about 12 years of studying. And then you ask him what kind of human physiology you know best. What field? Renal, respiratory, cardiovascular, neuro? What do you know, son? And then when you hire them, you don't hire them as professors. And you don't call them scholars. After 12 years in the very same discipline. Now, he doesn't know necessarily all the anatomy. He doesn't know the embryology. He doesn't know the histology. He doesn't know necessarily the pathology as a pathologist. He doesn't know the anatomy as an anatomist. He doesn't know the pharmacology as a pharmacologist. he knows the field, one field within the discipline, and you hire them as beginner researchers. After many years of working, they become assistant, they become associate professor, then they become professors. But not all professors are experts. You know that from universities. Many professors are just average scholars. After what now? It's been what, 12 years PhD, and then you put another 10 years in the field, now they're professors. It's going to take you at least that. So 20 years in the field. Not everybody is. And that's the field of teaching and properly producing academic work. Not just after 4 years of studying, putting the books down and then practicing. Then some of those professors become experts. Some of them become authorities. So that's scholarship. So with all due respect, I mean, I don't consider preachers, while their role is very important, scholars. I don't consider activists scholars. It's public speakers. I don't care how long the beard is or how big the imama is. They're good people, maybe better than all of us. But scholarship is one thing, and students and wannabes and whoever wants to, whatever it is, that's a different story. All right, so that's one. Within scholarship, I don't think there's differences much, to be honest with you. There are, but it's not vicious. It's not that negative. There are, because they're human beings still. But when you look at the differences between Al-Shafi'i, for example, and Abu Hanifa, rahimahumullah ta'ala, Shafi'i and Malik. Malik was one of the teachers of Al-Shafi'i. When Imam Shafi'i wrote a book against his teacher, Kitab al-Raddi ala Malik, the book of refuting Malik. Do you see any disrespect? You see academic clash of minds, not clash of hearts. But where do the clash of hearts, where do inciting hate and sort of belittling the others and casting them out as enemies of the deen and enemies of the prophets and enemies of the sunnah and enemies of whatever it is and all this, everyone reflects their essence and tarbiyah anyway. Everyone reflects their education anyway. Everyone reflects their own akhlaq and their own upbringing anyway. But where do you find that? You find that with the preaching world or the public speaking world, even if people call them scholars, which usually the case nowadays, because anyone who has the looks today and has the charisma and public speaking skills is called a scholar. So in the activism, you'll see that, because these people are driven by the market and the numbers and all that stuff, and the effect they want to leave on the people rather than the continuous educational standard that they need to bring about. So I don't think there's going to be a difference in the scholars. You might say, well, how do I tell, which one? Well, I mean, what field are you a scholar of, son? I mean, I get some people who we hire some people also in the other field. What are you a scholar of? You can't tell me I have a PhD or a couple of PhD and I am a scholar in everything. What are you a scholar of? What are you? Tafsir? Hadith? What madrasa of tafsir? Hadith? What hadith field? Because there's many fields in the hadith sciences that take you the whole life. You can't tell me you know everything about hadith because you're not al-Bukhari. Even al-Bukhari, in Ilm al-Rijal, he says Ali ibn al-Madini, in al-Ilal, he says Fulan, etc. Not all the things in the hadith. He says, I never belittled myself, al-Bukhari himself, in the ilm of so-and-so, al-Jarh wa al-Ta'dil, except in front of Yahya bin Ma'in. Or in Ilm al-Ilal, instead of Ali ibn al-Madini, one of the people who were present also at that time. He says, I found myself little before them. What do you know? So, a scholar of what? Because if you tell me a scholar of all Islamic disciplines, you're insulting my intelligence, and you're insulting the disciplines of the faith. With all due respect, it's an insult. It's not a praise. It's like me telling you, I'm a doctor who knows. I'm a master in pediatrics. I'm a scholar in pediatrics and gynecology and obstetrics and oncology and hematology and every single discipline out there, and you're going to look at me saying two things. You're either really, if I give you the benefit of the doubt, you're a genius or you're crazy. So we got to slow down with title mania stuff. And I think it's good that people research, and just like we demand in the secular field, if I may say that, we demand continuous medical education, we demand proper academic work. Public speaking should not be in lieu of that academic work is what should be present.
I think, though, perhaps you've clarified the idea of scholars, but I mean, there are differences. So it's obviously not coming from the scholars, but we do have some differences. So maybe just briefly, how should we go about in our lives when we do encounter people or intellectual terrorists, as you've said, or even if people just have good hearts and there may be a bit of tension that is there?
Oh no, I think even those who intellectually terrorize others, I hold them to have good intentions.
Okay.
I don't want to judge people's intentions. But that's not justification for what they do. Even people who commit real atrocities, in their mind, they're doing a good thing. Some of them, anyway. That doesn't justify what they do. So that needs to be good intentions by themselves are not good enough. So what do we do when we have these things? The basic thing is go back to the book and the authentic prophetic sunnah. And how do you do that? Demand. All right? And also not issue judgment until you ask the other people whom are they're claiming to be wrong. Two things. Don't tell me what the mashayikh say first. Yeah, I know your elders are very important to you, just like I said mine are. But first tell me what my Lord said, what my Prophet authentically said, and how authentic is this hadith. Because once we go into the weak things, in my view anyway, weak stuff has to be weak and has to remain on the side entirely. Right now we're at a level where the village is no longer burning the houses. So, book and sunnah. We disagree? Great. What did Allah say about this? And what did the sunnah say about this? And the sunnah, as far as authenticity, is it really authentic? Is there any countering of this? Is there any qualifying of this? And that should not be a big deal. Once it becomes he said, she said, you're lost. Because it becomes my people versus your people, and my shuyukh versus your shuyukh. And we need to get out of that. That's why I said at the beginning, what the shuyukh or what the big scholars say is for elucidation, not substantiation. It doesn't matter who they are. Even Al-Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Hanifa, Shafi'i, Malik, all of them, Allah Ta'ala be pleased with them. What they said is not for substantiation, no ta'sisan, isti'nasan, for elucidation of the substantiation. Substantiation is exclusively Allah Ta'ala and through the authentic prophetic sunnah of His Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. If we go back to the book and the sunnah, Shaykh, I know this is, you can say everybody says that, sure. But I think we can limit it to the book, the authentic prophetic sunnah. What if there is something in the book and the sunnah that's seen differently, two different ways? Well, that's what it is then, right? Meaning, it is okay to look at one thing and see it in two different ways. If I tell you what am I holding now and draw it, you will say you're holding your iPhone and you can draw what you see. And if I tell him, can you draw what you're seeing, and he will draw also my iPhone, but every one of you is looking at it different. You'll draw a different view based on what your perception is, but at the very same thing. What Islam has taught us and what the Prophet ﷺ taught us, that it is okay to look at one thing and see it in two different ways. But I need to get to that. Meaning I need to get that. If it's not muhkam in the Quran and the Sunnah, then if it accepts multiple visions or multiple perceptions, I may be passionate about one, but hey, he's not quoting Buddha here. He's not relying on the guy in the streets. He's relying on the Quran. He just sees it differently.
Okay, our final question from my side, just one of our followers wanted to know, just very briefly, what is your fondest memory of the late Shaykh Rashid Brown, Allah mercy on him?
Allah. Shaykh Abdul Rashid Brown was my brother, and he is my comrade in arms, I call him. Like all the many brothers who have been with us, because this is a struggle. Da'wah is a struggle. Allah says, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. Da'wah is not meant to be easy. Da'wah is not meant to be received with flowers. Prophets themselves, not us. which are nothing. Prophets themselves were not received with flowers, though they were aided by angels and they were aided by books and miracles. We, with our sins, Allahu Akbar. So the people who go for dawah are people who these moments of struggles and being in the trenches, I consider Shaykh Abdul Rashid Brown, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayhi wa radiya anhu, may Allah ta'ala grant him the highest level of Firdaus, is one of my comrades in arms, Rafiq Silah, Rafiq Darb. He's a comrade in struggle. We struggled together many times to bring this dawah, and negotiated many things and talked about many issues and things. He and many others here in South Africa, in the US, in the UK, wherever Medina is, and in Canada, in Malaysia, in Norway, in India, in Malaysia, in Australia, in many places where Medina has been working, alhamdulillah. We had lots of people who were comrades in arms. The struggle is not easy. Shaykh Abdul Rashid gave everything in that struggle, and I enjoyed his company. It reminds me with, Sayyidina Hamza radiallahu anhu, who was that comrade in struggle to the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. It reminds me with many of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum who went on, and you could do whatever you want to them, but they lived their principle. When they died on their principle. So may Allah Ta'ala gather Sidi Shaykh Abdul Rashid Brown with the highest level in the highest level of Firdaus, with the Anbiya and the Siddiqeen and the Shuhada and the Salihin, and keep us faithful on this struggle until we meet the Prophet Sallallahu Ta'ala Alayhi Wasallam unchanged.
So I think our final question then would be, if this is your last day on earth, what would your parting advice be?
Worship Him as if you're seeing Him, because He is seeing you. You're always with Him, even if you don't realize it. And He's all loving of you. Give and you will live. You don't give, you will not live. And I mean by giving here, not just money. Give. If you don't have anything to give, your smile is an act of giving. You got to give. The more you withhold, the more you will be withheld from. In every aspect. Knowledge, time, money, resources, smile, love. Everything. And never sell your principles. Never for sale. No matter what happens. Don't let anyone scare you by any other than Allah. Don't let anyone terrify you by their might. Allah's might is bigger. Love Allah, love people.
Jazakallah khair, Shaykh, for joining accidentalmuslims.com. You certainly are an ocean of knowledge, and we really appreciate you giving some of your time. We know you have a very busy schedule to share some of these very profound wisdom. So Jazakallah khairan. May Allah bless you and your family, and make your work easy, and may it just grow from strength to strength.
Allahumma ameen. Shukran lakum, jazakum Allahu khair al-jazaa.